Hey everyone, I'm Julie Lago from Connections Always, and today is actually our kickoff to our first podcast, Conversations and Connections. This is something that I've been wanting to do with Connections Always for the years since we started this, but it felt right to kick it off now and with one of my closest colleagues and friends, Kaile Moore. So I am going to share just for a quick minute about what we're going to do here at Conversations and Connections. And then I'm going to let Kaile introduce herself and we're going to jump into it. So, really hoping that this podcast is going to give an opportunity to bring in some really awesome people in the field, people in the community, and open to opportunities for conversations that other people might not be willing to have, might not be comfortable having, to give this space to make connections, not just here in this podcast, but maybe encourage you to make more connections out in the community to step outside of your comfort zone. So often we just don't talk about things because they make us uncomfortable, especially within disability and mental health topics. But here we're just going to avoid all that. And like I said, there's nobody better to start that off with than Kaile. So, Kaile, want to give them a little glimpse of who you are and why you're so awesome, but you're probably not going to phrase it like that, but you can because
Probably
you
not.
are.
Hi, I'm Kaile Moore. I have my master's in clinical mental health counseling, but I'm actually not a practicing clinician. I know. But I do work in the disability and mental health field currently. I have been in the system for almost a decade now, and I specialize usually with folks with brain injuries, and I am loud and I have a lot of opinions. No, I'm just kidding. No, I
A lot,
really
and it's great.
strive to have hard conversations. And I think that I'm really passionate about talking about things that most people don't want to talk about. And I have really big feelings and opinions on making sure that people's needs are being met and not just the basic needs that everybody thinks about when we talk about getting services or getting, therapy or connected to resources, and that we should really focus on things that we matter to us and that we get to experience, but oftentimes we overlook for other people. That's
And
me.
I love how you use the word loud, but that's like the rap we got, right? Like, I think both of us, which is why we connect so well. But is there another way right now?
No, I think that's the thing is that people are so afraid to have these conversations and so afraid to even like whisper about them that the only way anybody's going to turn and look at you about these topics is if you're like screaming it from the top of your hill.
Yeah. I think it's really funny that, and I can't believe I'm saying this because I say that I'm like, there we go, like everybody says this, but is professional women, we get labeled as loud or squeaky, but nobody ever says persistent or dedicated or passionate or committed. So loud and squeaky are what we get, but I guess that's what we get here. And so whatever, let's do it. And I don't know. We get that rap, but if we want change to actually happen, I haven't found another way yet. Like we've tried the nice way, and the nice way is good. And I think there's a path for that. And it's about how you make connections. You can make connections in that, that where you prioritize the relationships and all that. But then there are times where you have to be persistent
I think
sometimes.
having this conversation and the conversation that we intend to have in this kind of a platform is that you don't have to be loud to like normalize that conversation so that it no longer has to be me or you or somebody else standing in the back of the room shouting about these topics and coming across in that way, but instead being able to just walk into a meeting or into an appointment and just have a normal conversation.
Right. To make it the norm versus the exception. No. I mean, so goals. All right. Sounds great. So today we got together because we are wrapping up Mental Health Month and we're actually recording, on the last day of Mental Health Month. And so just transparently, I think that's the way we're going to go into this. This month has sucked and it's been a lot of grief and loss, some like actual losses in my life, some anniversaries, and like just the real life things. And grief and loss is also why I got into the social work field. And it made me think that one of the conversations we don't have is talking about how grief and loss impacts people with disability. So, but I'm not necessarily talking about death and dying, but that's a huge part of it too, because sometimes people hide that from people with disabilities. Like, oh, if we don't tell them, it's going to be okay. That's a whole different ballgame. But then you also have grief and loss of turnover in staff, changes in environment, people leaving, not having termination. Um, Grief and loss is a whole different thing. So, Kaylee and I were talking about coming together today to just call a spade and say, put the question out there, are we protecting or are we doing more harm when we are avoiding or not talking about grief and loss in the disability field enough? And how is that impacting people's mental health? So I opened the door to walk through it. I don't know. How do you want to kick that
I
off?
think and I feel like that's a huge part of it because it comes in so many different aspects, like you were saying. Like, we're not just talking about, when the folks that we work with maybe lose a parent or a family member, and there's kind of like this, like, there's this uncomfortability with broaching that subject with the individual because it might dysregulate them or they're having a good day, so we don't wanna, like, rock the boat. But then there's also the piece of, like, when their friends pass away or when their friends move and they don't know where they went, right? Like, they change programs and go somewhere else, and nobody thinks to call the other folks that are within that agency to let them know. And you really can't, because then there's this whole HIPAA component that I think a lot of people get really nervous about, and is something that I see all the time. People go, "I don't know what happened to them." And as a professional, like, I might know where so and so is, but their friends don't. And that's loss, like, because of the way that it happens, not inherently because that person moved. If they had the opportunity to stay in contact, it wouldn't be lost, but because of the way the supports and the systems work, often it becomes just loss outright.
Right. So if I'm hearing it correctly, or maybe it's just making me think, but I'm questioning, do people with disabilities, are they actually more likely to experience grief and loss than people without disabilities? Like, I don't have a statistic in front of me. I didn't prepare that much, but the conversation brings me to think that the way we look at HIPAA and understandably confidentiality, but are they more likely to be in a situation where they're experiencing grief and loss, but we're not, because it's not labeled as that, we just move on. But how do they? Is that kind
Yeah.
of that's what you're thinking, huh? I can see it.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think it's not something that we're tracking, right? Like, this system is so heavily dependent on a numbers game sometimes about, like, what we track behaviors, we track needs, we track, GAD-7 scores and all these other things, but who's tracking, like, relationships that are coming in and out of their life?
Well, and when we're tracking things like GAD, so like anxiety, depressions, like GAD and PHQ scores, those are anxiety and depression scores. When we're looking at those things, they're only as good as the why. And if we're not exploring the why, or we're assuming the why, which that's a whole other episode of this, is assumptions. Maybe that's the whole topic of this. But it's only as good as the questions we're asking. And if we're making assumptions or asking questions of, oh, anxious, have you had a change in your routine? Is there something coming up? Or, had, what losses have you had? But are we recognizing the losses that are actually there? Or are we defining what a loss is? Is somebody else defining what a loss is? No. Looking at every single layer, or better yet, are we just asking people? I've seen that missing. Like the pieces of answering for people instead of asking them or giving them an opportunity for it to feel safe. We see turnover in our field all the time, whether it's direct support professionals, mental health professionals, home care providers, people that are needing to leave their residence really fast, understandable for safety or whatever it may be. That doesn't mean you just lost your home. That's real. But but the question always comes up for me of, how are we supporting the mental health of these folks when those things happen? And this isn't a local thing. This is everywhere. Like, I think there's this misconception of, well, you're in a safer environment now. That's good enough. But what the heck about the mental health of these folks? Because if you took me from my environment and stuck me living with strangers potentially, or I can tell you I would not be okay. I wasn't okay my first year of boarding school, and that's essentially what it was. Stick me under a different roof with a bunch of different strangers, actually, is exactly what it was. I tell you, I was not okay.
Not having a good time.
No, it got better, but it took a lot of adjustment and a lot of therapy. Dude, why don't we ask? Like, what do you think from, like, being a mental health professional or being a human? Like, why don't you think why are people avoiding asking?
Think some of the work that I've done and some of the work I've done more recently has taught me that a lot of times people aren't asking because they know they're not going to like the answer. And I don't mean that in a disparaging way, and that's not to say the professionals or the people that I work with or know in the systems are bad. But I think that when you're looking at, and a whole separate topic, right? Like the burnout and the workforce shortages, people are very stretched thin. And so when somebody is going through a list of things to ask about, and they know that this question's gonna make more work
You really
because
just
that's
say
gonna
that?
put something on their plate. They're gonna have to now find these connections and these resources for people, and then never mind that, but are there any? So even if you're willing to do the work and even if you're asking the questions, is there even something we can offer people?
So they have to open the door and they're afraid that they're actually gonna have to walk through it.
Right. And then what other doors are on the other side of that one door, Like, I think mental health care for people with disabilities, and I don't need to tell you this, Julie, because you're the pioneer of this topic, is hard to find. Appropriate, competent, informed mental health providers for people with disabilities. And then you add on a layer of grief, right? Or we're talking about managing grief and loss, which is like almost a whole specialty in the mental health world, being able to have these conversations. And it's hard to find.
It's I think we say it made me think that when we meet somebody and you say, "How are you?" You're like, "Hey, how are you?" Like, so, like, I go down a market basket. Think about this. We're done here. I go down a market basket. I bump into somebody. I'm like, "Hey, how are you?" Am I actually asking because I have the time and the wherewithal to pause and get that response, and because I can engage in that, and am I opening a door I can walk through, or am I opening this like superficial door? Hey, how are you? Nice to see you. Bye. And that's kind of like what you're describing feels like of, hey, are you okay? Don't really tell me though, because I've got to go buy milk. Like, that's what it feels
Yeah, because
like.
I'm not gonna know what to do about that, or I'm not gonna have a solution for you.
Right. Like, I need to get through the supermarket before the rush. Like, please don't dive in. It really does feel like that though. But if we're responsible for the well-being of people, it's not a roof over somebody's head. It's not a program to keep them busy during the day. It's about a life of meaning. And I don't know of anybody. I can tell you that my days of the things that are meaningful to me, I can't get through if I don't focus on my mental health. And so if somebody's watching this that's been to my presentations, well, surprise, they know what I'm going to say. But I cannot make it out of bed and to work in the morning to a job that I love, like love, love, love my job. And I still have to focus on my mental health. I have to focus on my frustration tolerance. I got two little girls and they do not like to get dressed on time, much less independently. Like, mornings are stressful. That's mental health. It is making sure that all of my tasks are completed. Am I prepared for my day? Every single thing we do is mental health. But if we have a responsibility to support people, I think, like, if I'm hearing it correctly, the responsibility is to open the door with the willingness and the capacity, or at least the interest, to be able to walk through it. That's a big responsibility.
And I think too, if people were having this conversation before the emergency or the trauma or the event happens, right? Whether it's your what's the favorite term? Preferred staff is something. It's a word that I like kind of loathe, honestly, because it's like, yeah, it's true. They're a preferred person in their life, but like, you don't call your spouse your preferred person. They're your spouse or your friend or your colleague. Preferred staff feels very clinical to me. So, your preferred staff leaves or your friend passes away. Like, if we're talking about it before, it's not going to be as big of a lift for the team, and if we're identifying who this person can go to when something like that happens beforehand, then we can have a it'll be easier when it happens. So if people just had this conversation at the beginning, like, hey, like, who do you feel comfortable reaching out to if you're not having a good day? Or if your frustration tolerance is in the toilet? Because we all have a friend we call on the drive home with road rage and vent about terrible things happening. And you can frame it like that to the people you work with. It doesn't have to be this really clinical, like, hard to chew topic. It can be very simple, like, which one of us do you like enough to talk to? None of us will be mad if you say not you.
You give them permission to be human. What a
Yeah.
novel concept. You give them choice in who they're comfortable with versus assuming that you go in and they have to just dump and then, something's wrong if it's not you. Like it's going back to that it's going back to that idea of treating people like people and giving them choice, which again, like we're talking about all the branches that we can and will, go down. But when it comes back to grief and loss, I think I'm reminded of a situation that I was in one of my last jobs. And there was such fear in having to share information with a group of people. They were going to have to move because their residential setting was going to close. And for good reason. There were lots of good reasons. We don't have to go there. But the anxiety from the team members was overwhelming. And so they had it scripted down to who was going to be with who, like who's going to be paired up, where they were going to be, who was going to speak when, who was going to share what. And then when we did, we found out that the residents were happy. We were so nervous of how upset they would be. And are they going to are they going to go into crisis and what's going to happen? And they were so grateful that somebody made that decision finally and said, this isn't a good idea anymore. And what we did is we took away by overcomplicating it. I mean, granted, we told them, which a lot of times in the disability field, people just don't talk about if somebody has died or when somebody leaves, like, oh, maybe they won't notice. Or we just talk about it really quick and we move forward. But so we didn't take away the opportunity to talk about it. But what we did is we made it so much about us and our own anxiety that we took away their opportunity for resilience. So and what we found is they were so resilient. They were so grateful. They handled it amazingly. We all walked away and were like, see all that time we just spent? Like, but they were wonderful. But I guess it goes back to the question of when we mention things really fast and we expect people to move past them really quick because it makes us uncomfortable. Or we over prepare because what we're finding is that we're addressing our own discomfort. We're not addressing their discomfort. We can plan how to support them. We can plan, as best as possible, but avoiding actually addressing tough things with people, more harm than good. Good intent, but potentially more harm. It seems that way. I mean, I know this is going to be like kind of controversial. Some people will say, no, I know that person. It's better off not telling them. And then what? I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, I think that I would immediately, and I think of a situation with somebody that I work closely with, and how we had a very similar conversation about this when their friend was passing away and they were on hospice. And, the whole conversation about should we allow this person to go to hospice? And should we seek permission for this person to go do this? And the response was, what? Why wouldn't you? Like, wouldn't you want to go see your friend? But then there was this, well, it will dysregulate them. Well, it will do this. Well, it's not going to be good. Just like you were saying, the same kind of conversation. So what? They're going to get dysregulated if they spill, like I get dysregulated when I spill my coffee in the morning. Nobody's protecting me from that. And it brings me back to my first job in the field, which was dignity of risk, which just means letting people take risks to learn and build resilience. And you as a professional, or you as a staff, or you even as just like a family member, are going to gain more from allowing that to happen than you are from wearing yourself out trying to like cushion them through it. Because it's going to tell you what they need the next time. Even if they dysregulate, even if everything goes upside down, to hell in a handbasket, you're going to figure out what tools you need the next time, or you're going to be really surprised like we were, and they're going to do beautifully, and they're going to be able to process and cope and understand the situation for what it really is because they had a chance to see it for themselves.
Isn't sometimes doing beautifully being dysregulated? Because I would be really concerned if somebody wasn't upset, if somebody was right. Now, granted, we've all been in situations where maybe we've come to terms with it, or we're like, no, we recognize maybe that loss is the best thing. But why is it that we can get dysregulated, but people with disabilities can't? Or people with with mental health needs, they can't get dysregulated? No, like that's our discomfort. That is not about them. It is not about their best interest. That is because we don't feel comfortable handling it, supporting. I don't like the word handling. We don't feel comfortable supporting it. We don't know what to do. But have you ever met anybody who is getting news that they don't want to hear, or they're losing somebody that they love and they don't feel dysregulated? Like, that's human. But yet we take that away from people because they have disabilities or mental health needs, or no, they're going to go, like, they're going to destabilize. I was freaking destabilized last week when I lost a very, very close friend.
Yeah,
But
it's human.
yeah. But the way we handle that, like the way I got through that is I had the friends I knew who I could call. I had the friends that checked in because they knew I was quiet. You were one of them. And I also knew that it was okay to take a pause. Like, I went through my day to day, but when I came home or that weekend when, you get that crash after, I knew it was okay to take a pause. But if we don't recognize and give people the opportunity to even grieve or even process, or we don't give them the opportunity to hear of real life events, we take away all of those opportunities to be skillful and maybe experience emotion without crisis. Because maybe we've never given them the opportunity to, maybe the only opportunity we've given them is to experience emotions in crisis.
Or too rapidly for anybody to like justifiably process like that kind of news or that kind of situation. And don't get me wrong, I think there are times where maybe there's reasons, and I can respect that and understand that we don't live in a perfect world. Like sometimes things are just going to be a crisis or destabilizing or dysregulating. But I also think that that's the whole point of this conversation we're having, is that imagine if you had had that conversation before about who would you call on this team right now, that, which one of us do you like enough to call on a Saturday? And which team members are willing to do that, right? Like who would be willing if a situation occurred, not because you want to go get ice cream on a Saturday, but because you're having a time and you need somebody. And what would make you feel better? And I'm not talking about a behavioral plan that outlines that you'll use your coping skills. I'm talking about, like, do you like to eat breakfast for dinner when you're really sad? Is that a thing for you? Because I guarantee that, Julie, you did that last week when you took your pause. You probably did things a little backwards and upside down. Like,
I
be
for
creative with people and have a fun conversation. Make it normal. And you might
I
be surprised.
cleared a bag of caramel M&Ms, yes, last week, and like a family size. And so it is. And there's a spot on my couch where the cushion needs to be flipped, and that's okay. But permission, right? Like, permission to be human. And you mentioned that there are times where it might not be appropriate, that there are decisions. I remember when my best friend and her sister were both on hospice at the same time, and they lost a family member that they weren't going to see. That family member was, out of the States, and she, and it was sudden. It wasn't as expected as their passings were going to be. And their family decided, is it in the best interest to tell them? Because they're so sick right now. Like, they have so much going on. This isn't somebody that they expect to walk in the door. So they're weighing pros and cons. So there's always something of what is in somebody's best interest, but recognizing too, when are people experiencing grief and loss right in front of them? And are we taking that opportunity away from them, versus is it truly going to do more harm than good? And is there something that's going to be known, or we're not trying to be deceitful, right? Like, there's balance. There's always balance to that decision making. And so it's definitely individualized. But I think recognizing that people are going through grief and loss, and so many times we're avoiding it. It's not, we're avoiding the unavoidable. And that's scary. And so maybe the next time we do we do our next episode of this is, so you open the door, now what? Because you mentioned what's on the other side and how many other door you walk in. It's kind of like that. I don't know. I think of like those, I don't know, old little cartoons when we grew up, of like, the fun house, right? Of you open the door and then there's a whole hallway and then there are other doors, but are there? And are they locked? Do they say not for you? Like, really? Or so maybe that's our next episode, is to kind of look at, if you open the door, then what do you do when there may not be a lot on the other side, but it can't prevent you from opening the door?
Yeah, and how do you make that part of that conversation that you're having, right? To get that door open, you started having a conversation, and how do you include how we get to the next place in that? Because it can all just be one big conversation. It'll probably take you under a half hour.
Sounds
Clearly.
good. All right. Well, thanks for doing this. So, and let's bring some more friends in for that conversation, because I can think of a lot of people that are going to be pretty eager to have that conversation with us. So, that sounds good. So, if this hit a connection or hit anything for you today, please make sure to write in the comments anything that it made you think about. If it made you think of anything that you might do differently, we'd love to hear about it. Please feel free to share this with other people that might just need to hear about the importance of conversations and connections, because it's a small conversation, a brief conversation, that can make a connection that will make a huge, huge difference. So thanks so much, Kaylee. I appreciate your time.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Hey everyone, this is Julie with Conversations and Connections. Thanks for tuning in to this episode. If you want to see all the things we are up to at Connections Always, follow us on Facebook, Instagram, or LinkedIn, or visit our website, connectionsalways.com. Don't forget to subscribe here to be part of the conversations and connections to come. You never know what's going to come up in our next conversation.